to everyone. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to Professor Andrei Marmor from Colgan University. We all know Andrei's work here on legal interpretation, legal conclusionalism, and also exclusive legal positivism, so I don't want to expand on that. And thank you, Andrei, for being here. Today he's presenting a paper on law, fiction, and reality. The usual format is about 40 minutes presentation and then more or less 1 hour for debate. It's your time now.
Thank you very much for inviting me. So, this paper is roughly about metaphysics, pretty shallow metaphysics, not going to go very deep. And it starts from, I mean, in my mind at least, it starts from the following kind of puzzle question. So if you think about the existence of law, there is one sense in which obviously laws exist. We talk about the law being this or that. Furthermore, interestingly, the existence of laws is in some clear sense spatio-temporal. So there is law so-and-so here, but not there, having a law before, but not anymore. So the existence of laws is tied to space and time. On the other hand, there is a sense in which laws don't exist. They don't form part of the fabric of the natural universe. They depend on us, humans. I think Kelsen gave a very good formulation of that thought when he said that the law is entirely a scheme of interpretation. It's just the way we humans interpret certain actions and events that happen in the world. Okay, so on one hand, we have a sense in which laws clearly exist, their existence is spatio-temporal. On the other hand, there is a sense in which laws don't exist as part of the natural universe. So does it mean that law is entirely in our minds? And how can it be entirely in our minds and yet tied to space and time? So these are the kind of issues that prompt me to think about it. I'm not going to give a very direct answer to this question. So, but at least some way towards an answer. So I'm going to talk about two things, two aspects that I think are part of the nature of law. And you might think that I'm talking about two very different things, but I'm hoping that I can tie them together eventually and show you that in a way it's one and the same thing. So the two things are law as an artifact. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what artifacts are. And then I'm going to talk about law as fiction. Law as a certain type of discourse that we call fictionalism. And then hopefully tie the two together and say something about the metaphysics of law. As usual, part of the conclusion is going to be that working is wrong, but that's not the point of it. Okay, so let me start with artifacts. Okay, what are artifacts? They are things created by human beings, okay, for particular purposes, for various uses. Okay. Now, artifacts are created intentionally, so they are the kind of things that we create intentionally. But that doesn't mean that the nature of the artifact is necessarily affected by or depends on the intention with which it was created. Okay? Because artifacts can be created with the intention to serve purpose X, but they turn out to be used for purpose Y, so they become Y-type artifacts. Okay? So I'm not assuming that artifacts have to be created with an intention to become X, but they are created intentionally. Okay? They are objects created by intentional actions of human beings. Okay? Now, there is a kind of deep ontological debate in the literature about separate objects from their building blocks. So the example people give is, for example, you take a piece of clay and you knead it into a statue, a face. So the question is the statue, the shape, the face, a separate object? Okay. And there are reasons to think that the answer is yes, there are reasons to doubt it. I'm not going to go into any. I am going to make an assumption, however, that artifacts are sufficiently metaphysically independent from their building blocks, so that there are certain things we can say about it that are constrained by their essential features. Okay? So there are certain things we can say about chairs that we cannot say about water, and so on and so forth. Okay? That's the only kind of metaphysical assumption I'm going to make. Okay. So chairs, bottles of water, coffee, iPhone, all those are artifacts. But there are a whole bunch of artifacts that we call intangible. They're not objects in the physical sense, and they are artifacts. So good examples would be novels, poems, legends, gods, narratives, generally. These are artifacts. Why they are artifacts? Because they are intentionally created with certain content. And they are used for various purposes, ways which define their character. Okay. Now, intangible artifacts, I'm assuming, supervene on their building blocks. Okay. They supervene on the physical things that bring them into existence. Just as the chair supervenes on the material from which it is built. So a story supervenes on some expression. Somebody has to write it down for a story, express it in words, and so on and so forth. So they are not mysterious entities. They are anchored in the natural fabric of the universe by way of supervenance. Here's another claim I want to make, which I think would be essential to my argument about the nature of artifacts. That their existence depends on a community, on a population that actually uses them in certain ways, that actually treats them in certain ways. Okay? And the way in which we use artifacts is constitutive of what they are. So here's one way to think about it. Imagine a world like ours, kind of, where there are chairs, chair-looking objects, but nobody's sitting on them. They're not used for sitting. They're not used for anything. They just lie there. So my claim is, my contention is that that is a world where there are no chairs. There are chair-like objects, chair-shaped objects, but no chairs because they're not used this way. Or imagine a world in which people just take every expression, every proposition as an expression of a straightforward proposition. In other words, they believe that when you say something, you intend to say that this is how things really are. Okay? Well, that would be a world in which there is no fiction. People can tell stories, but they would not be fiction, because fiction requires what we call suspension of belief. It requires imagining something that's not necessarily true. So if people are not capable of doing that, then they cannot use stories in the way we use stories as fiction. So that would be a world with no fiction. In other words, I'm assuming that the way we actually treat and use objects is constitutive of their nature. Okay. So now let's see what follows from it. By looking at the familiar distinction between ways in which the meaning of the words we use relates to their reference, to the objects they pick up. We call that directionality of sense and reference. Now, this will sound very familiar to you, I'm assuming, pretty sure. Suppose we can divide the world very roughly into two kinds of things. Things we find in and things we create, things we make. Now, most of the words we use, most of the concepts, if you like, I don't like very much using the word concepts. I don't know what concepts are, but people seem to know that, so fine, I'll use concepts. So think about concepts of words we use to designate the kind of things we find in the world, things we assume are there and we just pointing them out. So Hillary Putnam, a long time ago in the 1970s, showed very convincingly that the way we use such words, the way we introduce them into the natural language, is by way of trying to refer to the nature of the thing, whatever it turns out to be. Okay? So we talk about water, the word for water, we think it's that thing, and that's what we want to refer to. So the way Putnam put it is that reference determines the meaning. Right? Whatever water is what we mean by it. Okay? Now, one really important consequence of that is that with respect, and he called these words natural kinds. So one important consequence of natural kinds words is that we can be fundamentally mistaken about the true nature of the reference. Right? So if I intend to refer to something, we have collectively, it's not about individual, to refer to something as water, okay? Then we have all sorts of hypotheses about what water is, and each one of them can turn out to be false. Okay? So I call that the possibility of fundamental error. Natural kinds always allow for the possibility of fundamental error. Okay? And Putnam has a whole bunch of nice examples. So, with natural kind words, because we intend to refer to the thing, whatever it is, we can always be wrong about what we think about it is. Now, about things we create, artifacts, tangible or intangible. The relation between reference and meaning goes the other way around. Goes the kind of traditional. That the meaning determines the reference. Okay? Whatever we mean by chairs is what chairs are. Why is that? Because chairs are the kinds of things we create. And the kind of things that we identify as chairs because we use them as chairs. Our use, the way we treat the things, is what determines their nature as such. It's what determines their meaning. And therefore, whatever we mean by those words is what they are. In other words, with words designating artifacts, there is no possibility of fundamental error. Okay? It cannot happen that we will come to discover that, whoops, chairs are not what we really thought of them. Because the way we use chairs, the way we treat them, what we think about them, is constitutive of what they are. It just is what they are. Okay? So the idea that we can come to learn something that would make us think that we were wrong all along makes no sense. Okay? Doesn't happen. Now, I have to insert a few qualifications here. Okay. One which I will not dwell on, I'll just mention it, is that proper names would be an exception to what I said. Because proper names are artifacts, and they actually behave in some ways like natural times. And Kripke has a very elaborate theory about that, so I just acknowledge that proper names are sui generis. Okay. The more important caveat I have to kind of insert here, or actually it's more of a clarification, has to do with the type token distinction. So think about chairs. We can think about chairs as a type, as a kind of artifact, and we can think about the tokens, this and that. Now, when I say that artifact words do not allow for the possibility of fundamental error, I mean the type, not the token. You can always be mistaken about the token. So I can complain to Diego that this chair is uncomfortable, and he could answer by saying, that's actually not a chair. You're not sitting on a chair. And he may be right. I may be wrong about that. It was actually meant as something else. I just thought that's fine, that makes sense. What doesn't make sense is that we somehow misidentified the nature of the type. Okay? We don't know what chairs are. They are something else. Okay? Those chairs just are what's in our mind. Okay. So let me put this a bit more precisely. Okay. Here's the more precise formulation. If A is an object of an artifact type F, the answer to the question, what makes an A an F, is what is fully determined by ways in which we use the typical F in a purposeful manner, ways in which we think about it, ways in which we categorize it, in other words, things that are in our mind. Okay? So that's the sense in which artifact words, the reference of artifact words is in our minds. Not the token, but the type. Okay? At least the essential properties. Okay. So, there are many, many artifacts, tangible and intangible, that are compound. Compound, I mean artifact within an artifact. So I'll start with the spatial metaphor, but I don't mean it only in the spatial sense. So here's the spatial example. Think about a portrait or painting exhibited in a museum. Okay. Well, the painting is an artifact, undoubtedly. Museum is an artifact. And the painting being exhibited in a museum gives the painting a somewhat different meaning. Okay. Now, I don't mean this only in the spatial sense. Okay, it's an easy metaphor because it's spatial, but I'll give others which are less spatial. I mean it in the sense that one type of artifact has an impact and changes the way in which we think of another artifact within it. So, my art historian friends don't like this example, but think about, last time I was in MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, there was an exhibit of a pile of sand with some sticks in it, and a little label with the name of the artist. And I think, okay, if that pile of sand with the sticks in it was outside on the street, people would walk over it, and nobody would think for a second that it's a work of art. But it's exhibited in the Museum of Modern Art. Okay, it's a work of art. So the museum context, which is totally an artifact, right? It's an institution. It's not part of the natural fabric of the universe, gives a completely different meaning to the artifact within it. So that's what I mean by compound artifacts. When we have one type of artifact that creates, that sort of gives room to a different type of artifact and changes what it is or affects what it is. And we have that all over. Sometimes it's what is compound is the tangible with the intangible. Think about a computer program. Right? So a computer program is an intangible artifact that's supposed to operate on the machine, right? Something very tangible. So that's also compound artifact. So if you come to think about it, probably most of the artifacts we have in the world are compound in various ways. Now, I am interested in a particular type of compound artifact. Which I think is relevant to all. Many artifacts are shaped partly by social conventions. So think about artistic genres, right? Ways in which we create various works of art. Like novels, for example. The novel is an artifact, is an intangible artifact, but it's partly shaped by conventions about what novels are. What is it that we expect from novels? For example, the convention about suspension of belief. That when you read a novel, you're not supposed to take every sentence there as a proposition describing the world, but there's an invitation to imagine. Okay, that's the convention. Then there are all sorts of more detailed conventions about the structure of novels, that they have to have a beginning, middle, and end, that they have to have some characters, and so on and so on. There are all sorts of conventions. And then they differentiate novels from poetry, and poetry, lyric poetry from epic poetry. All these are partly shaped by conventions. So when you have an epic poem, for example, or novel, or a novel, you have an artifact created by the artist, but it's compound because it is partly shaped and guided by conventions. And of course, I'm assuming that conventions are artifacts. I hope it's evident they are artifacts. They satisfy all the conditions I mentioned earlier. They're created by us. Their content and shape and essential features are determined by the way we use them, and so on and so forth. So I think that many artifacts we have are compound in the sense of being at least partly shaped by various conventions. Okay? But they are just one type of compound artifacts. There are all sorts of ways of compound artifacts, like the computer program. Okay. So this, for now, is what I wanted to say about artifacts. Now I switch topics, and I'll start talking about Agatha Christie's Poirot, which I hope you are totally familiar with. All right. So if you've read or saw movies of Agatha Christie's mysteries, there's a whole bunch of things you know about Poirot, the famous Belgian detective. You know that he's Belgian. He has a mustache. He lives in London. Things like that. How do you know that? The story says so. Okay. Oh, and he's very arrogant. That's important. Very arrogant. How do you know that? Because that's what Agatha Christie says about him. Okay. Now, of course, Poirot is an intangible artifact. Okay. And what he is, with the mustache and arrogance and all, is entirely a function of what Agatha Christie says that he is. Okay. So it's a standard easy example of cases in which the saying so makes it. Like my saying that it's raining outside won't make it that it's raining outside. But Agatha Christie's saying that Poirot has a mustache makes it the case that Poirot has a mustache. Okay. Cool. Now, I can say other things about Poirot. For instance, that his character is very shallow, devoid of human complexity. I can say that his infallibility is always right. It's irritating and incredible and kind of silly. I can say that his arrogance is irritating or not convincing. Now, some of these statements might be true, okay? But they are not true in virtue of Agatha Christie saying so. Right? In fact, they are critical of her character. And that's typical of fiction, right? That there are certain statements which are true in the fiction by virtue of the author saying so. And things we can say about the fiction from the outside, as it were, that may be true or false, but not in virtue of the author saying so. Okay. So I follow David Lewis here, and I call the first type prefixed statements. It's very, very close to what you would know from jurisprudence as statements from the point of view. Okay. That was Raz's expression. Kelsen has a very similar, it goes way back, this idea that there are statements you make from a particular point of view. So, for various reasons, I use the Lewis terminology. And what Lewis was interested in, and I wrote some about it in the legal context as well, is about the logical problem we have when we mix prefix with non-prefix statements. So Lewis has a famous example. It's not about Poirot, it's about Sherlock Holmes. So he says, consider the following statements all true. Number one, that Sherlock Holmes lived in 221B Baker Street in London. Number two, the building in 221B Baker Street in London is a bank. Conclusion, Sherlock Holmes lived in a bank. False. Okay, so that's a failure. That's the fallacy. Why do we get the fallacy? Because we mix a prefix statement that Sherlock Holmes lived in Baker Street, which is true in the fiction, but it's prefixed in the fiction. It's closed in the context of the fiction. With a statement from the outside, it's not true in the fiction that the building is a bank. And then we get fallacies. Okay. So I'm not interested in this paper about the fallacy. What I'm interested in is this idea of prefixed context. Okay. Now, in earlier work, I drew a distinction between two kinds of prefixes. I call them open and closed. Some prefixes are open in the sense that they don't generate the Lewis type fallacy. For example, you can say, according to logic X, so and so, and that's fine, you won't get problems. Or you can say, according to the laws of nature, so and so, and you won't get problems. But if you think about prefixes like according to fiction X, that's a closed prefix. That will generate the Lewis type fallacy. Now, why is that? What makes prefixes closed? That's what I'm interested in here. So what happens with closed prefixes is that they create a context, or they operate within a context, where the context is such that it's constitutive of the truth of the statement within it. Okay? And And that's what happens in fiction, right? It creates context, where the context is constitutive of what is true in the fiction. In other words, prefix contexts, closed prefix contexts, are such in which the saying so makes it so. Okay? Now you think, okay, where else do we have prefix contexts that are closed apart from fiction and poetry? Oh, we have a whole bunch. Think about games, structured games like football, chess, things like that. Okay. So there are lots of things that are true by saying so. When the umpire, I don't know, how do you call the umpire in soccer games, in football? The referee, right, the referee calls the player out. Right. Then his calling the player out makes it the case that now something happens in the game. That player has to go out. Or when he calls it a goal, then it makes it the case that now something happens. It's a goal. Okay. And why is that? Because the game is a closed prefix. It's such that its rules constitute what counts as true in the game. Okay. Institutional contexts are like that. Okay. When the chairman of the meeting says the meeting is adjourned, then, it doesn't matter whether we hang around or not and keep talking. Officially, the meeting is adjourned because the chairman or the chairwoman says so. Okay. So we have a whole bunch of these prefix contexts where the saying so makes it so. Okay. Now, just a little caveat. I don't elaborate about this in this paper. Actually, two caveats. I don't elaborate on them. Part of it I wrote elsewhere. One caveat is that even very close prefix contexts like fiction can incorporate, by implication, statements that are not prefix. So, even if Agatha Christie says nothing about Poirot's nose, his nose is never mentioned, we can safely assume that he had one, and only one, okay, by virtue of being a human being. So fiction incorporates an indefinite number of true statements, even if they are not mentioned. And there are all sorts of things we can say about ways of incorporation and all that. I won't go into that. None of that affects my argument here. The other thing that I would mention as a caveat is that, and there is a lot of literature in that, in philosophy of art, that there is a limit to how much the saying so can make sense. So not everything, even in a prefix context, can be said. It can be said, but it won't make it so. So if a story starts by telling you about the wonderful, delightful torture of an innocent young child, okay, nothing really happens. There's a limit to how much we can imagine. Or if you want a more obvious example, the story begins by telling you about the square triangle, then that won't. So there are limits. Anyway, what I'm interested in is the question of what makes prefixes closed, what enables closed prefixes. And the answer, which I think was given, though in a different context, a long time ago by John Searle, is that rules, norms, conventions, things like that. Okay. The set of rules is usually what makes it possible for a context to kind of make it the case that the saying so makes sense. Okay. Now, I don't buy the whole Searle story. Searle thought that it's true about all performative speech acts. I think he's wrong about that. Doesn't matter. But the underlying intuition is right, I think. That what creates closed prefixes is a set of rules or conventions. For example, it's the conventions of what counts as literature that enable it to be the case that the saying so makes it so in the story. adjourning of the meeting by the chairperson makes it so, while other people are saying the meeting is adjourned. Doesn't make it so. And so on and so forth. So I think that there is some normative background that creates these prefix contexts. I'm almost done. I say create, by the way, I mean constitute. There are two, rules can create prefix context in a kind of strong sense of constitution and in a weaker sense of constitution. So conventions can fully determine the prefix context in the case, for example, of games, right? What constitutes a game would fully determine what's true in that game. What constitutes the rules that constitute football fully determine what counts as true in football, fully determine the truth in that prefix context. When you think about things like literature or poetry, the constitution is somewhat weaker, right? It's not that the rules fully determine what counts as a novel, but they kind of shape what counts. They partly constitute. Okay. Okay. So these are the two backgrounds, right? Compound artifacts, and in particular, the kind of compound artifacts shaped by convention, and prefix context that make it the case that the same so makes it so. Okay. Now, I think that they come together. Right? That the idea of a prefixed context that allows for the same so making it so is just one paradigmatic example of a compound artifact constituted by convention. Okay. So it's just an artifact within an artifact. Okay. Now, I think that that's what's going on in law. Okay. So law is a compound artifact, very complex. It operates within many other compound artifacts. It's an artifact partly because its foundations are conventional. I argued a long time ago that there are two layers of conventions. There are deep conventions that constitute what law is, and then more shallow conventions that determine what law in Spain is and what law in France is, and so on and so forth. It doesn't matter for us now, but the idea is that there's something conventional, rule-shaped at the background, and as I said, conventions are artifacts. And then actions in according to those artifacts generate the law. And of course, the law is, again, one of the paradigmatic examples where the same so makes it so. Right? If the appropriate authorities say that you're not allowed to smoke here, then you're not allowed to smoke. From a legal point of view, right? It's just like in fiction. The fiction says, the story says the moon is pink, then the moon is pink, but only in the story. Okay? It's exactly the same idea. And exactly the same thing that enables it. It's a prefix context generated by, enabled by okay. There's one aspect in which that's one area in which the law really differs from fiction and games and things like that, is that the legal prefix, the from the legal point of view kind of thing is necessarily tied to jurisdictions. Right? It's not just floating up. It's tied to a particular jurisdiction. If I say the law is such and such, I expressed a very incomplete proposition because you can always ask when and where. So if I say the law is that you're not allowed to smoke in a classroom, it's incomplete. So it depends whether it's true or not, it depends. Spain, now, Catalonia, in Cambodia, I'm sure you are allowed to smoke in the classroom. Okay? So there is something special about the legal prefix, that it's spatio-temporal. And the reason for that is that it has something to do with authority and power. And that's tied to jurisdiction. My argument about this in this paper is incomplete because I have a whole other paper about the nature of practical authorities that shows that the practical authorities just generally are essentially tied to space-time, tied to particular jurisdiction. So I just rely on that. So that's kind of what makes the law a special kind of prefix, that it's jurisdiction independent. But otherwise, it's just like any other prefix. Okay. So, let's conclude with some metaphysics that follows with this. I think that what I've said so far, at least I hope, shows that there is really a sense in which the law is only in our minds. Okay. Now, what do we mean by that? Of course, not the tokens, only the type. Okay. Just like the idea of chairs, the concept of chairs. What chairs are is something that's in our mind. It doesn't mean that there are no chairs. There are chairs. I'm sitting on one. Similarly, in the legal case, I mean, there are legal actions, there are things that happen, people find themselves in jail or with less money than they had before and things like that, of course. But if you think about the law as a premise of practical reasoning, as the kind of thing we use to justify putting people in jail, to order putting people in jail, law as a premise in a practical argument, that's entirely in our minds. Okay? That's an intangible artifact. And in that sense, law is entirely mind-dependent. I think that follows. The second thing that follows is that we cannot have fundamental errors about what the law is. Again, remember the type-token distinction. Of course, we can have errors about this particular law or that particular law, okay, or what the law on this particular issue really is. Okay, that's what allows lawyers to earn a living. That they can argue about that, and something be right and something be wrong. What we cannot be wrong about is the law as a type of what makes something legal to begin with. Okay. What is that is essential to law. So fundamental errors about what law is are not possible. Which entails that Dworkin was wrong about that. Dworkin argued famously that lawyers can have theoretical disagreements about the nature of law. And I think that that's just not metaphysically possible. Okay. Now, again, there is a caveat, because since I claim that law is a very compound artifact, okay, it's not just a single artifact, it's artifact within artifact within artifact. It's like, you know, a painting exhibited in a museum in a city, so on and so forth. We can have very sensible disagreements about the various contributions of this or that artifact to the whole. Right? What's more important, what's less important. So we can have all sorts of theoretical arguments and disagreements about the nature of law. The one thing we cannot have is a fundamental error, about which I mean that we cannot come to discover that law is something else than what we had thought all along. Okay? That's just not possible. Okay.
Thank you very much.